just to let you know, I will call mass digitization often with the abbreviation MD and National Archives of Finland with the abbreviation of NAF. Okay, to begin with, I would like to say a few words about our activities. The process and method of MD operation were modeled in 2017, and the starting point was a recent supplement to Archives Act, which made it possible to dispose analog records under the condition that the migration from analog to digital objects could take place so that information and integrity and authenticity are preserved. And the testing phase lasted for 2 years, during which time facilities and personnel were also acquired, and the server and disk storage systems were built. The piloting, 2019, achieved its goals, and it made it possible to move into production phase at the beginning of last year, 2020. Digital archiving service and the long-term storage systems, which are independent and separate from the production service, were introduced during the production phase, basically last year. And the customer use of the digitized objects we produce are possible at the moment for the governmental agency users only, but soon will be also for other customers too, I hope, still at the end of this year. And what does MD, mass digitization, mean, and what are its goals? Firstly, our digitization is disposal-oriented, which means that the analog manifestations will be disposed after the digitization at the end of the specified waiting period. I would like to stress that nothing has been disposed so far. Disposal process will begin in 2022 at earliest, when enough experience has been gained from the customer's use and the disposal process has been defined. That's something we are working right now. And secondly, our operations are centralized. In other words, all material to be digitized is transferred from the governmental agencies, to our production locations. Thus, the agencies themselves do not digitize their mass digitization qualified material. And the MD doesn't concern either with any of the records which have been previously transferred to the National Archives, but only the material still in the custody of the agencies. And thirdly, the concept mass refers to the scale of activities, of course. The amount of material estimated suitable for MD is about 130 shelf kilometers. And currently we are digitizing only something like 2 shelf kilometers annually. So which means that we are really only in the beginning. The production employs about 30 people, and we use 21 different scanners or combinations of scanner devices, like document scanners and surface scanners, and etc. Our goals. Our service obviously has many goals. We believe we will improve the usability and accessibility of the data when it is accessible to everybody through the user interface, regardless of location or time of day. Basically, at the moment, there are vast collections at the governmental agencies' repositories, which the citizens and scholars are unable to use because they are unaware of them. From the point of view of the agencies themselves, the gap between the use of born digital and analog manifestations can finally be reduced. This is a must, because over the last 10 years, the majority of agencies have moved to a purely digital environment. The accumulation of paper documents has in practice come to an end, or soon will be, due to recent data management regulations. However, there are cases where agencies have many digital databases or management systems which refer to documents that are in analog form. Of course, both of these data is essential. And for these reasons, the National Archives will only accept material in born digital form or by a so-called transfer contract between NAF and agency to make sure that it will be digitized. Thanks to digitization, it is often possible to give up disproportionately expensive archival repositories. The NAF does not need to build new premises. The last one was inaugurated 2 years ago, and it's already starting to fill up. Once the data is in digital form and the content has been recognized, it will be easier for the scholars to find out what information the data contains and to combine and analyze it more flexibly. And what's most important, digital documents or digital manifestations are considered to be complete and authentic documents, not just a copy as has been the case so far. So the idea of this presentation is to very briefly address some of the challenges we have faced in planning and production of MD and the aspects we think should be taken into account in addressing them. And the idea is to give a kind of a broad description on a very general level of the questions we have had to deal with in building our system and still do in order to have the agency's archival material transferred and digitized. And these challenges or chapters of the presentation you can see here on the slide, four chapters. So permanent preservation, the quality, production pace, and cost effectiveness. So the most common question about our disposal-oriented digitization is whether we are really going to dispose everything, all the analog collections. Of course not. MD covers only a part of all permanently preserved documents, and I will tell you more about this on the next slide also. A preservation decision or disposal decision will be made of all material transferred to the National Archives before possible digitization. Analog records regarded as a cultural heritage will not be disposed, not disposed in analog form. The strategic goal of the National Archives has been to dispose about from 80 to 90% of the analog material still held by the agencies. At this time, it appears that only some percentages, maybe 1 or 2%, are retained in analog form. As the MD files are held by the agencies, they are also relatively young, mainly in A4 format. Older documents have already been transferred to the National Archives and they will not be mass digitized. So, to be clear, we are talking here about the documents that are created in a digital environment, then preserved in analog format because of the previous legislation, and now they will be migrated or transferred again to the digital format. Thus, first, the material that is excluded from the disposal-oriented digitization is defined. Then one must determine what requirements are set for those records that are set for mass digitization. The formats must be information preserving but also usable in the future. Of each record page with the data content front and back, archival master files and access files with the same data content must be produced as a transfer package of JPEG files with compression 90 or higher, lossy compression and resolution 300 pixels per inch. The sRGB ICC profile of images must be embedded in image metadata. Instead of hierarchical structures, metadata describing the relationships and the purpose of the material is important. So we give access to our metadata database for the agencies who will fill in, so to speak, the basic descriptive metadata. And what is important is that the information in database matches with the analog archival units that are going to be digitized. So it's not necessary to create sophisticated hierarchical information of series, etc., etc. Optical content recognition is important because it is, we believe, at the heart of the future application development regarding digitization, more than the scanner device technologies, for example. So the question is not how it will be done, how it will be digitized, but more how it will be used afterwards. The mere production of metadata describing the information and its context is not enough, but also the metadata describing the digitization process itself should be included. Of each archival master file produced in the digitization process, an XML file in accordance with the mixed schema must be created. And in addition to image files, a separate XML auto file containing the OCR results must be saved. The requirements for creating a long-term storage system are outside my presentation. However, I have to say we have already found that implementing alongside production system, independent and separate systems for digital archiving service, serving as an interface for customer use, and one system for permanent storage is a very practical arrangement. First of all, to a certain extent, all of these systems can be developed within their own timetables, and in addition, the requirements and review processes between these separate systems become more clear. So, then about the quality, a few remarks. The premise, of course, is that every single image file must contain the same information as its analog manifestation, and it must be visually available. To put it better, it has to be visually identical. Achieving this bounding call requires phased testing. In the proof of concept stage implemented in 2018, we tested the suitability of different scanners for the authentic material and the realization of the desired image quality on a small scale. A categorization was drawn according how different kind of analog materials should be digitized. In the pilot next year, 12-19, the technical requirements were updated and a more extensive equipment was procured, and the entire stages of the digitization process were piloted with something like 450 shelf meters of authentic material from the agencies. And what's important, the production digitization in the pilot was started only after the setup was tested and approved to reach the technical requirements. Approved practices in the different phases of digitization were compiled in a detailed digitization manual. It's something like 150 pages at the moment. So the initiation of our personnel, all the operators and experts, is based on this manual this day. The more heterogeneous the data or the material is, the more challenging is the quality control. Therefore, the material is inspected at the agency's repositories before it is transferred to our production. Material has to fulfill a certain criteria related to its shapes and condition and so on to be approved into mass digitization. And according to these criteria, a little bit more than 2/3, so 130 kilometers, of all material in possession of agencies are estimated to be digitized in the service of mass digitalization. There is also another service of digitalization in national archives. We could call it like passive digitization, which will take care of the rest. And of course, the agencies have always the option to digitize themselves if they want to. Usually they don't. Testing shows that quality control does not start when the material comes to production. Obviously, it starts long before that. And once the requirements are clear, the technical requirements, and the processes and implementation methods can be defined and procured accordingly. And testing under actual production conditions reveals how different risks, such as dirt and dust or multi-feed problems, just to mention a few, in the chosen setup of scanners and conditions will actually realize. Well, although quality has been, or hopefully has been made to work once, it needs to be constantly monitored. Quality can never be taken for granted, and monitoring can be based on either regular procedures or various checkpoints. In the mass digitization, the quality of the image file is measured with regard to different aspects of image quality every day. These include, among other, color, resolution, sharpness, noise, and measurements are conducted with universal test targets to each scanner to make sure that the image quality is sufficient and it remains stable. In order to have an even level of quality, the entire scanning infrastructure must be up to date, in good condition, clean, and set to operate so that it produces outputs that are in line with the threshold specifications. The content of the image is checked, at least for the time being, as a human labor. Each image produced in MD is validated using a specific validation application, which is developed for this purpose. Criteria for rejecting the most common errors have been created to be used in this application of validation. There are typically 8 or 10 typical errors that occur. Discarded images will be returned for rescan. Approved images are transferred to post-processing, where, for example, the number, the structure, and integrity of the images are checked using the checksums and subjected to post-processing operations, the most important of which are the OCR and the packaging of the metadata of the digitization process. To put it simply, the process is automated so that people only need to take part in the process if there is an error in the system used. The image package cannot proceed to the next step unless it meets the requirements of each review step. Basically, the process consists of 2 systems: the transfer application created by our own solution developers and the receiving service or system, which is the digital archiving service, which is called SAPA. Here it's only mentioned as a service 2 to demonstrate that it's a different system from our production system. The SAPA, or the system or the service 2 here, is responsible for transferring access files to user interfaces and compressing the transfer package created in the digitization process in the format required by the long-term storage system. And finally, when customers reach a digital object, we hopefully can develop the process and correct errors according to their feedback. Thus, there are verification steps within production at different stages of digitization, but also in connection with the transmission and reception between these 3 different services. Then GDPR, it's a very broad topic. It would require its own kind of quality control. Basically, all our records in our service include some sort of personal, not public data. Virtually, the server infrastructure used in our production and the network it uses have been separated from all other NAF networks, as well as the production facilities have been separated from all other NAF workspaces. All this requires quite a lot of arrangements that make it more difficult to use the common NAF interfaces, as well as to exploit the possible synergies of our different digitization services. So the challenge is to keep, so to speak, visitors outside, but at the same time be in contact with the NAF interfaces which are created for customers and citizens. So then about the production pace. Speed of production is almost as important as quality in the large-scale digitization, because if digitization is slow, it risks losing its funding and the personnel will lose their faith and motivation. The efficiency of the equipment and the competence and commitment of the staff are, of course, crucial, but they will prove almost useless if the structural factors behind them are neglected. The digital objects produced in mass digitization require efficient network connections and low latency, both within the process and between different services, especially when working in different localities, in different cities as we are. There must be sufficient capacity behind the digitization. The MD storage area of server and disk system is completely virtual. No images are stored on local servers. Infrastructure is also scalable to a greater or lesser capacity according to the current scale of our production. If there is not enough capacity, bottlenecks in production will form, and at burst it will stop. So it is important that automated post-processing can perform when production is not in progress, typically at night times and on weekends. Production speed is also affected by technical requirements, of course, such as whether the selected file type is a TIFF or, as in our case, JPEG. In addition, it takes time to control the image quality with the UTT targets according to specification. It's also very important to remember that production must be kept separate from development. Therefore, a complete test environment must be built alongside the production, where the developed applications and new software can be tested and eventually added to the production environment with the shortest possible break. All breaks end up decreasing the production speed. That's why the scanners need to be kept running with minimal downtime. A good principle is that people need breaks, but scanners don't, at least in the office hours. In MD, actual digitization applications have been developed, for example, for validation and for the post-processing of the transfer packages. Still, production is a very much human labor, and applications are needed for that as well. They can be used to gather statistics on speed, to set goals and guide people's work. Of course, the information is also needed to monitor and solve errors whenever they occur. The so-called logistics application developed in MD is a kind of a poor man's production management control system that is based on barcode reading and tells at which processing stage each archival unit is running in the production. So each archival unit carries a personal barcode tag. And this application collects and transmits information on production speed as well. However, the most significant speed regulators is not the scanner. The manufacturer's maximum speed almost never realizes, actually, with the archival material, or even the network, but the analog records themselves. Although the material for mass digitization is limited according to the criteria I mentioned, the material is still so heterogeneous that production speeds vary greatly. For this reason, the material should be consulted several times before it ever enters to production. So our people go to the agencies to check the material. There are 4 different types of scanner devices available in our production, exactly due to the heterogeneity of the material. As the MD material comes from the authorities, the biggest risk of all for the production is that the material will not be transferred at all. So then it will be a complete break. And for this reason, the guidance of the agencies of how to prepare the material for our processes is launched by MD experts approximately 1.5 years before the planned start of the production. Automated review processes and applications obviously speed up production. And in the future, the production speed can also be developed by means of artificial intelligence and robotics. At the moment, it seems that non-human resources are playing an increasingly important role, especially in the digitization of very homogeneous large-scale data, and in particular in certain phases of the digitization process, such as the preparation for scanning, validation, or maybe when creating descriptive metadata at the agencies. In the near future, artificial intelligence components for blank page recognition and misdirection recognition of the images will be introduced in our service. Later, there will be extensive AI components for typical error detection. However, developing these APIs, these application programming interfaces, requires quite a lot of authentic material. The more heterogeneous is the material, the more you need to teach, and the greater is the potential of the errors of these APIs. And finally, some remarks on the cost benefits. Justifying cost effectiveness often feels like a very cumbersome extra work. However, cost-benefit accounting is also useful for developing our production. Without it, we have seen that production can bit by bit become a little bit more expensive and inefficient. Those people less familiar with digitization will often be surprised that the work involves more than just scanning. The costs of preparation and preservation in particular often surprise. The cost structure depends on the maturity of the service. Acquisition costs are emphasized in the initial phase. Later, maintenance and personnel costs dominate. The higher the production is, the longer it takes to set up production and make it profitable. Digitization of all MD material would take something like 14.5 years with an annual production speed of 9,000 shelf meters, and it would take 32.5 years with an annual production speed of 4,000 shelf meters. With the first mentioned quicker pace, the annual cost in the initial stage is higher and it takes longer to achieve savings. However, the overall cost will be lower and the savings greater than in the longer term option. It is often pretty much political decision as to what funding is available and how long digitization will take accordingly. Regardless of the duration, the order of digitization must be specified anyway. In Finland, agencies are in most cases very eager to have their material digitized soon. In order to determine the order in our production digitization, a so-called mass digitization roadmap consisting of all the 130 shelf kilometers has been prepared together in cooperation with the agencies. And the order of digitization is based on jointly agreed criteria, such as the urgencies to have the material digitized, or the resources the agencies have for preparing to material for transfer. When evaluating cost effectiveness, one must also consider whether the goal is to have quickly the desired solutions in production or whether to develop one's own competence. It is of course somewhat easier to launch the operations by purchasing available products by tender procurement procedures. Unfortunately, this may end up in a higher maintenance costs in the long run, or even situations where the supplier can dictate prices. Developing your own skills is slow, but it reduces costs and market risks. It gives you more choice and autonomy in developing the total service. Often, the result is the combination of both, since turnkey applications are pretty rarely available, yet hardware, for example, sets certain conditions for the development. So, that's pretty much in a nutshell every angle of our production, and hope if you have questions, please send them to me and we will reply to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ville Kajanne. Es gibt gleich eine Frage im Chat, so I'm going to read it from Dr. Eriska. Digitization may be helpful, but what about possible material damaged even to digitized material? Even digitized material may be damaged, so it's really the solution to save originals.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I will, sure. Digitization may be helpful, but what about possible material damage, even to digitized material?
Well, of course, this is more a question of the permanent storage system than the actual production, but I can only tell that we are pretty sure that our management system is pretty solid at the moment. And of course, because we have at least 5 checkpoints before the digital object reach the storage system. So that's something that makes us pretty confident that material will be in safe.
And another question, wie können wir denn sicher sein, dass das Original tatsächlich nicht mehr gebraucht wird?
Well, as I said in the beginning, we think that having digital objects give pretty much more possible. It gives you a little bit, much more options how and where and in what different ways to use the record.
Wir haben eine Frage hier im Saal von Herrn Kissen-Nicht-Zerfas am Mikrofon.
Ja, vielen Dank für den Vortrag. Ich wäre Ihnen dankbar, wenn Sie uns noch ein bisschen besser erklären oder noch mal ausführlicher erklären könnten, was genau Gegenstand der Digitalisierung ist. Das hat sicherlich auch was mit unterschiedlichen Verfahren und auch rechtlichen Rahmenbedingungen zu tun, aber ganz offen gefragt, ich habe Sie so verstanden, es ist eine Überlegung, die im Grunde in dieser Übergangsphase von analogem zu digitalem Schriftgut eine Brücke bildet, um in unserer Sprache hybride Akten, also sowohl digitale wie analoge Anteile zu vermeiden und sozusagen einen bestimmten Schnitt zu ziehen und da sozusagen im Vorgriff auf das, was die Zukunft ist, eben die Übernahme digitaler Daten, sozusagen einen einheitlichen Stand zu schaffen. Das heißt also, dem müsste jetzt nach unserem Verständnis ja eine Entscheidung vorausgegangen sein, was eigentlich später ins Archiv soll oder nicht. Wir sprechen da von Archivwürdigkeit. Dann sprachen Sie aber in Ihrem Vortrag auch mit dem ausdrücklichen Satz, Kulturgut wird nicht vernichtet, davon, das waren diese 1 bis 2%, die jetzt nach unserem Verständnis Archivgut gleich Kulturgut, sozusagen das ist, was wirklich dauerhaft für die Ewigkeit aufbewahrt werden soll. Also an dieser Schnittstelle wäre es, glaube ich, auch für unsere fachliche Diskussion sehr hilfreich, wenn wir etwas genauer diese Trennschärfe, machen Sie das sozusagen für die Behörden, in denen das Schriftgut entsteht und auch für sich als sozusagen Einstieg in digitale Archivierung der Zukunft, oder welches Interesse hat eigentlich das finnische Nationalarchiv an dieser Strategie? Und vielleicht noch ganz kurz eine Frage aus den derzeitigen Produktionen, wenn ich Sie richtig verstanden habe, 2 laufende Kilometer pro Jahr. Haben Sie da mal eine Größenordnung von Terabytes, vielleicht auch Petabytes, die dabei entstehen, um die man sich dann eben langfristig kümmern muss? Dankeschön.
So to begin from the end, the databyte collection at the moment is something like 54 terabytes. So after these 2 years of production, and about that from 1 to 2%, we are talking about really those analog formats that will remain in analog form because of their nature, so to speak. So that's what meant by the cultural heritage. And when we're talking about pretty modern documents, which have been originally born in the digital environment, in most cases, we see that it's not necessary to put them in analog form. And for who we are working obviously for the agencies, but of course everybody. So all the citizens and scholars and any customer are the customers who use our service.